Alright, hello everybody, welcome to Slam, the podcast that reviews every single DC superhero ever. This is your co-host Michael, and I'm joined by...
Joshua Mervell. I'm pretty excited for today's episode. This character that we're talking about is like a new interest of mine, so it's kind of cool that we're getting to get a little bit more of a deeper dive into him.
Yeah,
what he's all about.
And when you say newer interest, you mean 1 week ago is when you became interested in him, right?
Really? Yeah. Well, I've read some. Well, we're talking about Sandman. I've read some Sandman comics, the Neil Gaiman ones, but I didn't know anything about Wesley Dodds.
Interesting. Okay.
So I haven't read all of the run of Neil Gaiman Sandman, but I am familiar with it, and I didn't know at all about the Sandman Mystery Theater, which we did talk about last episode of Slam.
Fascinating.
So I went back and started reading Mystery Theater after that. So yeah, it's kind of like this character's kind of come back and is a you know, it's kind of exciting to read about him again. I'm definitely going to be going back now and reading the Sandman Neil Gaiman run once I'm done with Mystery Theater as well,
that's on everyone's agenda for sure.
Yeah.
Now we should point out the interesting thing about doing these chronologically is that I was always suspicious, but it was finally confirmed through my meticulous research that Sandman actually appeared before Batman. I didn't know that.
That's super interesting.
Yeah.
It's also crazy to think that, because I don't know much about this character's history. I assumed that this was a Neil Gaiman original idea, and he kind of is, like, his version of Sandman is his own take on the character, but a lot of what we know from the popular version of Sandman, Dream, a lot of his inspiration is taken from the original. So there's like definitely ties throughout. And we're also going to be kind of like talking briefly about a little bit about how they're like in universe tied together, which is kind of interesting. We'll
definitely talk about that, especially when we get to the Neil Gaiman issue. But first, we're going to talk about Sandman, Wesley Dodds. So this is another trench-coated vigilante in the vein of the Crimson Avenger, which was in the vein of Green Hornet, and also a little bit of the Shadow, right? Mm-hmm. So again, this is after Superman, but before Batman. So these characters were not really superheroes yet, other than Superman. They were still kind of imitating the pulp characters, right? So in this case, we have a guy in a red suit with a purple cape and a kind of light purple-ish mask and a blue and yellow, hat, a purple hat and a bluish yellow gas mask. That's his key feature, right? Yeah. Now, I had never read this issue before, so I did send you the what's it called? The Who's Who entry from 1986 with Sandman, both of them, Sandman 1 and Sandman 2. And this is the costume I always knew, which was a green suit with a purple cape. So slight color variation, which I believe he got with the second issue, but I could be wrong. Later on in the 40s, he gained a Jack Kirby designed superhero costume, yellow with purple, and then Sandy the Golden Boy was, I think, yellow and red or something. But anyway, so this is the first design for the Wesley Dodds Sandman. And you said, sorry, am I summarizing this one, or are you?
Yeah, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure. So basically, we are introduced to Wesley Dodds, is part of a company called the Dodds Bessing Steel Corporation. And they are going to be testing a government ray gun, right? This is 1939, so ray guns was all the rage. And they're going to be... Oh, we should point out, this is from World's Fair Comics #1. There was only 2 issues ever published of this series, and I think that they were fairly far apart, but they were tied into the New York World's Fair, which I don't know much about, but it was, I believe, like a kind of event to show off like new technology, right? And if you look at the cover of this issue, it's just got a picture of the what is it called, the Perisphere, and the what is this thing called? Do you know what I'm talking about here? This is famous architectural thing on the cover. I should probably know this.
I don't know what it is, but I've definitely seen it before. Yeah. It's like this big pointy,
right? Yeah, and it was also used as the headquarters of the All-Star Squadron later on. It's called the Trilon and the Perisphere, and it's in Queens, New York. So anyway, another interesting factoid about the cover is that Superman's hair is miscolored blonde and his shirt is red. But again, this was the early days; like things were not consistent back then. So anyway, so all these stories I assume tie into the actual New York World's Fair, and so they're going to the New York World's Fair and they're going to show off their new government ray gun. But this guy Everett, who works at the company, he wants to bring the plans to this event, right? And what's his name? Wesley is like, the model will be enough. Why is Everett bringing the plans? So that's kind of like your first red flag that something suspicious is going on. So anyway, so they get together with a group of these guys and they're all talking. And what's his name? Wesley Dodds happens to take out the plans out of his little whatever you call that, not briefcase, but whatever it's called. He takes
like a folder, yeah.
Like a folder. He takes out the plans and he knocks one of the sheets into the ground, which they close in on, like the camera closes in on. And then as we're standing there around talking, all of a sudden the lights go out. Then the lights come back on. Someone snatched the grip from my hands. Must have gone out the door after him. So someone has stolen the plans. And then Wesley's like, well, luckily, I dropped that one sheet, and then while the lights were out, I picked it up. And then without this, the other drawings are valueless, right? So we should also point out that this art style, like we've been talking about a lot of Golden Age comics lately, this art style, in my opinion, is actually really good. It reminds me a little bit of Steve Ditko and a little bit of Watchmen, actually. Like, obviously, Dave Gibbons was going for a Golden Age feel when he did Watchmen, but this art is, I think, a slight notch above the rest. So anyway.
Yeah, it does feel more grounded, and the faces have a little bit more detail and expression. Right. A lot of the earlier ones that we were reading, like Slam Bradley, was very kind of like generic round face, and usually the mouth was like singular line kind of feel. Right. This does have a little bit more depth to it.
And I love Joe Shuster, but his art was a little bit sketchier, but also more fluid and kind of loose. This is more formal and like more skilled. Like this guy's a better artist, right? Like you can see it. It's still a little bit sloppy, but you can tell that he's a skilled artist. Yeah. Also, I love the sequence coming up here because then what happens is he goes into a safe. Wesley Dodds, he's like, meanwhile, the key plan will rest safely here. And then the next thing you get is a rarity in Golden Age comics, a silent panel while he pulls out his gas mask. And then the next panel, he repeats the word and he says, and the Sandman lives again. And now he's in his full Sandman garb. And next panel, first, a visit to the government archives. So he's talking out loud to himself as he's, moving. Instead of thought bubbles or narration, he's just talking out loud, right? So he goes and he finds out that there was a George Henry that was with them just now, like that night, and he was an imposter. So then he leaves and he's gonna go back to the World's Fair building, and he's going through, and of course he finds the real one tied up. And he unties him, he ungags him, and the guy's like, "You're the Sandman." And he's like, "Yes, and I want your help. Who is your double? Who tied you up?" Right? And then basically, he tells him the person that tied me up is an international spy, Boris Leland. And then he gives him some information, and then the Sandman jumps into his powerful car, just like the Green Hornet and the Crimson Avenger. He has a cool car, right? So he speeds away, and then this is funny. In the next sequence, he has his gas mask on, but he's also completely shirtless, and he's quite lean. So he dives into like this lake, and he climbs again. More silent panels, which was unusual.
Yeah, like almost an entire page of silence. Right. Yeah.
Right. So he dives in and he's swimming along, and then he climbs aboard this boat, and he's got his gun with him, and he overhears like the bad guys talking about what they're doing, and he's like, "Oh no!" He's like, they're looking through the plans that they stole. Like, "Oh look, the key plan, it's gone. We've been duped." And then just at that moment, the bad guy Leland, he picks up the phone. He's like, "What are you trying to do? Give us the double cross? The key plan's gone." "Yes, I'm sure. You'll be here in an hour, right?" So then now they're waiting for someone else to come. So Sandman, he climbs into the crow's nest of the boat and he's waiting. And then here comes the other person to meet him. It turns out it is, we don't know yet, but he goes down onto the boat and he gasses up one of the bad guys, because that's what he has, right? He has a gas gun. And we should also point out that he's completely shirtless, but he does have a holster for his gas gun. And
right.
he's using his sand to put the people to sleep, which is really cool. So then he bursts into like the thing on the boat where all the people are, and then he sees his partner, "Evar, it's you." And the guy's like, Who are you? How do you know me?" "Yes, who are you?" "I, gentlemen, am sometimes known as the Sandman. I understand you've thieved plans for a new ray gun." So then they try to attack him, but then he shoots them all with his gas gun. And they're all falling asleep, but Evarts escapes. He chases them and corners them in this room. And he's like, "Why did you betray Wesley Dodds?" And Evarts is like, "I needed money." So then he knocks him out with his gas gun. And then he jumps into his car and takes off. And then he calls the police. And they say, "Oh, now they found the good Henry, right? The one that he rescued." So then Sandman goes back and he makes sure that the cops make the capture, and then he mails the plans he says here, "Now if the Sandman mails the plans, it will look better in the papers for Wesley Dodds." So he mails them to himself. And then that's it. He pretty much saves the day, and then it's reported in the newspaper. And then we cut over to the New York World's Fair. "The Sandman must be a great guy, don't you think so?" "Great guy? Well, maybe so. The end." And that's it. So I thought it was pretty cool, like, standard fare for this time period, but I thought it was a pretty good story, and I really liked the art. What did you think?
Yeah, it's fantastic. I think it's the best. I think it's the best Golden Age comic we've read for sure.
It could be. I think you're right.
The character is very well rounded. The story is clear and makes sense. It has a through line from the beginning to the end. Like, things aren't just kind of happening throughout. And we have enough time to actually, like, explain, like, read what's happening, rather than them just, like, in one panel telling us a synopsis of what happened in a scene.
Right.
So I really enjoyed this one. I like the character of the Sandman. I like his... I'm not sure why he chose to, like, have a gas mask and call himself the Sandman, but I like it.
Yes,
you know what I mean? Like, they don't really go into his backstory here, but it's kind of nice because we can just enjoy this story.
Right.
But yeah, it's good. The art is great too. So
yes,
yeah.
I agree. I think of all the Golden Age comics we've read, I mean, obviously I love Superman, but this is probably the one that I would go back and check out, just to see what the rest of the issues are like. And especially in this period, this earlier period, when, like, before he gets like a superhero costume, So
I think this is the only one too that I would recommend somebody to read, even without the without the context of it being the first of something. Like, it's just a good solid story that I would say, like, yeah, you should read it.
I agree. Okay, so with that is the first appearance of the Sandman, which, looking back, we'll call Sandman 1, or the Golden Age Sandman, which we'll explain a little bit better. But basically, this character lasted several years. He was a member of the Seven Soldiers of Victory, and then along with every DC superhero except Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman, he eventually fizzled out, and his run was canceled. His series was canceled. He didn't have his own solo run, but he appeared in other comics, like Adventure Comics and stuff like that.
Right.
And then the character was not seen again, really, until the name was revived in the 1970s by Jack Kirby, who had recently come over from Marvel. He, unfortunately, his first attempt at creating new characters failed, which would have been the New Gods, Mr. Miracle, the Forever People. And then his second batch of characters was stuff like Commandy, the Demon, stuff like that. And the Sandman was kind of an oddball comic. It was meant to be a one-shot, which he did with his Golden Age partner, Joe Simon. And it was so successful that they brought it back like a year later. But the first couple issues after #1 were actually not done by Kirby. They were done by Mike Fleischer and Ernie Chan. And then Kirby came back for the last 2 issues, I think. And then that character disappeared, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. But Josh, you're going to tell us what happens in this issue of Sandman, which is #1.
Right. Okay. So first of all, the cover is very, very different from what we just read.
Yes.
We see kind of this like Silver Age comic looking character. He's in like yellow tights with a red cape, and he's got the red undies and the red like swashbuckler Captain America boots. Right. Some red gloves. He's got this like strange helmet mask thing going on where it's I
love this design.
It's like red, but it's got like a yellow frame around just his face. Mm-hmm. And it looks like he is almost like in a dream himself. And we see in like the bottom corner this kid, and he's dreaming all of these like horrible things, and Sandman is like over top trying to save him. And that's kind of the premise, honestly, of this whole story. We start off in this like disaster. There's these giant floods happening in Cape Kennedy, off the reefs of the Dolphin Islands. I'm not sure if that's a real place or not, but we see this kid is asleep, and he is floating along in his bed in this water, and he can't wake up. We see this old man. He's like struggling to stay afloat, and he can't sleep, and he's got this strange doll in his hands. And we cut over to reality, where this old man named Ezra wakes up, and he hears his grandson in the other room kind of screaming out in his sleep that he can't breathe. So he wakes him up, and what happens next? He wakes him up, and he believes that the dream is real. Mm-hmm. And he sees that his toy went missing. Correct. So he runs outside. He runs outside to find it. He puts on his rain boots and his jacket, and he runs straight outside. And we see Sandman is watching all of this happen. And behind, he's in this like weird control room type of a secret base. And behind him, he's got encased in these glass tubes. That are labeled for us, of course, Brute and Glob. We have this like big Brute is like this big wrestler type of guy. He's got this nasty face, gigantic hands, and he's just like super muscular. And in the smaller of the two tubes, we have this essentially head, like this human head with like frog legs attached to the bottom, and it's like almost looks like a blobfish, where it's like kind of like melting and wrinkly and blobby. So in his dream he sees this man, and he does go out to the ocean, and there is a man there that they do save. And in this man's hands is this doll. And it turns out that this is it's just a man, I guess. It's just a man, and he's dead. They find him, and they scoop him up out of the ocean, and he's already drowned at this point. In his hands, the last thing he says is the warbling, take the warbling, boy. And and then he dies. And Jed takes this like demonic looking green alien toy, and he kind of gets attached to it. We see almost like a little bit of a montage type of thing, where over the next few weeks the boy gets attached to the toy, We find out that his parents passed when he was young, so he's now being taken care of by his grandfather. His grandfather hates this toy. He gets really bad, weird vibes from it. And then we see Jed falls asleep again with this Warbling, this toy. And in his dream, the Warbling is gigantic and is starting to chase after his grandfather. And they're on this like weird planet type of thing. The ground is like shaking and rumbling, and it falls underneath Jed. And Jed is like falling, and we see from the Sandman's secret base, he sees on his machine Jed falling, and nightmare starts flashing on the screen. So this is an emergency. He has to fly over there and like jump through dreams. Essentially, he's like the universal master of dreams.
Yeah, it's so he's using a machine to transverse dimensions. So it's a weird mixture of mysticism and science fiction, right? So it's really fun at this point. I think it's really interesting that we have this like superhero that deals with technology and like magic to help people through their dreams, and watching him. So he's afraid that he's going to hurt himself even in his dream. So he jumps through and he saves Jed from falling. And his grandpa once again in the real world hears him screaming in his sleep and wakes him up. So he's now saved, and his grandpa has had enough after everything that happened the past few days and the Warbling freaking him out. He's decided that it's time for him to destroy this thing once and for all. He smacks it against the table and it shatters into a bunch of pieces, and he storms off into the closet and grabs a shovel and buries it in the backyard. This sequence is fucking crazy.
It's so good, and it is crazy, but it's so well done.
Oh, I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
Let's just describe what happens. So it's almost silent page. We see the old man walking with his sack, silent panel. Then we see him digging a hole in the background. In the foreground, we see this little toy creature like laying there with his eyes kind of rolled up. Then we see him dragging
looking at him.
Yeah, almost looking at him.
Yeah.
Then he drags the sack and puts it in the ground like he's going to bury it. And the creature has this weird look on his face. And the second last panel is the creature's face almost covered in dirt, but he's staring at the old man. And I am scared for my life when I look at this panel. And then the old man's like, there, that's the end of you. Now maybe our lives will be peaceable again. I doubt they will be. Well, let me just say that, Kirby has many qualities, but you can say anything you want about this comic, but this sequence is freaking creepy. It's so well done. I love it. But anyway,
and it's just like an old man and a toy. It's so well done.
I agree.
From now on, this is where the story gets
weird,
insane, and weird. Like I have no idea what's happening. So we cut over to General Electric, this company in Asia. I believe it's Japan, I think they say.
Yes.
This is where the first nightmare happens. So I'm assuming in the same area that this boy is living. And we see it's almost like an operating table.
Yes.
And they're working on this man who I don't even know how to describe it. They're saving his life, and they're
his brain. What is it? Something happened where his brain exploded.
Right,
and then
they're using electronics from this company to build him a new brain and a new head. So we see now that the surgery was successful, so they're doing like tests on him and seeing how he's kind of like working and functioning. And it's like this old man, and he's got this giant like bulbous alien head coming out almost from his actual head, and it's this clear dome with all of these electronic parts that are moving around, and
yeah, it's just so brilliant. I love it. Yeah,
so we see that he's like tinkering with all of these electronic parts, and it turns out that he builds a new Warbling. It looks like a girl doll this time,
right?
And he like gets aggressive with one of the nurses there, or one of the doctors.
Yeah, and he's like, "Yeah, do not touch." So then they call the guards in.
Right, and then the guards barge in, and he panics and jumps out the window and starts running away from the hospital. We cut back to the island, and we see there's a dog there where the old man buried the first Warbling, and he digs it up, and we cut back to Sandman and in his like base, and the alarms start going crazy once this Warbling gets dug up. And it's a 4-alarm nightmare. So this is huge that this thing is here. I'm not even sure why automatically this is happening, because I don't think any nightmares are actually happening. The doll is just dug up again. But he tells these like tube things, "No, I'm not bringing you with you. I've got to go.
Right.
There's no time for nightmares like you." Yeah. So he jumps into the ejector tube, of course, and he starts going and helping out with like a natural disaster, with an earthquake, and then he starts getting questioned by the police, so he like dumps some like sleeping sand on him and continues on his way. He jumps over to Jed as he's digging up this toy, and he's like so happy that he's found his old friend again, and he's stopped by these weird like almost like military looking people. They've got these like high ranking officer suits on, and they confront the boy and they grab him, and they're trying to take the Warbling from him. That's when Sandman shows up, and he starts knocking them out and helping Jed, and they end up running him over with a Jeep. And he gets knocked out. So we cut over to some sort of base where this guy, General Electric.
What a name, eh?
Yeah, General
This is the
Electric.
bad guy with the brain, the crazy brain.
Yeah. He's there, and there's 2 operating tables. On one is empty, and on the other is the new Warbling that he created. And don't ask me how or why, but he wants the old Warbling to connect to the new Warbling, and when that happens, the White House is going to blow up. I don't know why. They don't explain how these 2 dolls connecting does this, but apparently this guy that made the Warblings can do bad things with the dolls. So Sandman, while tied up, he's able to like grab some sand from his pocket and throw it in one of these officers, these like Nazi officers' eyes who are working for General Electric. And he doesn't grab sand. He's able to he fakes like he's going to grab for sand, and then that officer grabs a whistle from his pocket or whatever. He's like, what's this? And he blows on the whistle, which activates the tubes with Glob and Brute.
Yes.
And they show up with like some like sacks. And they release these like creepy nightmare fuel like creatures, like rats and bugs,
and centipedes,
like these nasty things. And they all start attacking the guards, and It gives Sandman some time to escape, and General Electric starts like shooting beams out of his brain. Sorry. Glob blows on the whistle, and that defeats General Electric. Mm-hmm. It's so loud that his brain shatters from the sound waves, I guess. That can happen. And they're able to jump out of this like base in time before he explodes. And it pretty much ends right there. He's like, well, Jed, hopefully your dreams are all dreams and there's no more nightmares. We got to get back to our base. And they run away on a lightning bolt into the sky. It
is so... Okay, there's so much to say about this. First of all, okay, number one, Jack Kirby's my favorite artist.
Right.
This is not his best work, but... I'll say two things. First of all, he always needed a good inker, and Mike Royer is okay, but he doesn't do enough to smooth over the rough edges of Kirby's art. In some panels, the art is really sloppy, but in some panels, it's just as good as his work at Marvel, I think. And I mean, like the close-up shot of General Electric on digital page 11, when he's like looking at that little doohickey thing, it looks like anything he would have done at Marvel, right? Like you can see that if he had Joe Sinnott inking him, it'd be perfect, I think, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. Now, one thing about his DC work is that, again, he didn't have Stan Lee to help him out, to smooth things over. So it is a little bit awkward. The dialogue isn't as good, obviously. Stan Lee's dialogue is great. But in my opinion, the imagination of these concepts is crazy. Like, this is something, like, let's be clear, compared to the first Sandman story we read, which was like a kind of a pulpy type story, that was actually more for a slightly older audience. This is for kids.
Yeah,
like, I can see
100%.
This as a crazy Saturday morning cartoon, but the imagination is there. Like, the ideas of Brute and Glob, and the nightmare viewing screen, and jumping into the tube, and the frickin' doll, like, and then the General Electric, like, all the elements are here for a series. So I actually thought this was great. Like, I'd love to read more of this. What do you think?
Well, I think that I think that it's a great start, and I like all of these ideas. I just feel like it needed to be edited a little bit to like be told in a coherent story. Mm-hmm. I think the idea and the characters are very, very fun. It's just some things just kind of happen because we need a bad guy. We need a bad guy, so let's make him blow up the White House with the dolls, and we'll have it so when you connect them together, bad things happen. It's like, what? Wait, what? What's happening? And also, too, like, where did the first Warbling even come from? Did they explain that? Because we see him make the second one after they do the surgery on him.
I don't think they explain where it comes from. It's just that he just shows up in that kid's nightmare, right?
Right.
And then he's just there. They get it from the old man, but they don't explain where it comes from, no.
So, like, how does General Electric know about the first Warbling? And that...
Well, maybe he assuming he designed it? I don't know.
Maybe, yeah. But, it's very good. I love the concept of, like, a serial type of story where we can have new characters show up with nightmares and different things happening in them, and then this superhero has to show up and save the day and get rid of all of these nightmares. That opens the door for anything to happen, because every episode is going to be taking place, or every issue is going to be taking place inside of a dream where like the most wild things can happen. Like next issue he could be fighting dinosaurs. You know what I mean? Like they could do anything with it. That concept is really fun. I like this mix of like magic and mysticism with the dreams and jumping through portals mixed with like electronics and harnessing that in like this very technological type of facility. I like that he's harnessing like villains, the nightmares, to like have on his team, but he's got to like keep them at bay in these tubes. That's super fun. Yes. It's just that this comic, like this story in particular, was not very good, I think. I'm actually, though, just from the concepts alone, interested to see what happens in other stories, or
sure
what else is going on with this series. Like this has made me want to read more. Hopefully there are some better stories in here, but I think that this concept is great, and I think that they could revive it today and this could work.
Well, thankfully he does kind of pop up now and again, and I mean, I've kind of lost track of current DC continuity, but he is sort of around sometimes. So yes, he does pop up here and there, which we'll talk about a little bit in our next review. But I definitely think it's unfortunate that this concept died so quickly, because I think it's worth. There's definitely some good ideas there, like you said. Just the very fact that it's tied to dreams, which means you can have dream logic, which means you can do anything. And there's also a mix of science fiction and fantasy. I think that's what makes it so cool. And I love his costume. I think it's great.
I think if they keep the conflicts happening within the dreams and not tying them to the real world, it could be very interesting. Like, you can bring in different concepts too, like the dream where you're just constantly falling,
right?
You know, and like how do you recover from that, like that sensation of just like falling forever, or different like recurring nightmares of like your teeth falling out, or, you know, like you can come up with different like villains based on those recurring dreams. Like you can have like a dentist villain that's like, you know, like there's so many like ideas that you can go. If you're gonna make it like pulpy and goofy and like geared towards kids, I think you could go wild with it and have some fun. Absolutely. So
now, I do want to say, I actually want to, hold on a sec here. I want to ask you, did you look at the Who's Who pages that I sent, by any chance?
I did.
Just because I want to, before we go forward, I want to point out that the Golden Age Sandman was drawn by Michael Bear, and I think the art there is perfect for that character.
It's great.
Yeah. As far as the Sandman is by Jack Kirby. That's a great shot. But what I want to do is I want to send you another version of this character, which I wish we could do every DC superhero, but we don't have time for that, right? For that noise. Right. But first I'm going to send you one link. The second link I'm sending you, just look at that one. That is Who's Who Update 88. And that's Hector Sanders Hall, who's actually in the Sandman TV show. And that's him in a slightly different version of Kirby's costume, but now you can, because Kirby's such a weird artist, you can kind of see what the Sandman would look like if drawn by a more traditional comic artist, and you can see how cool his design is. I think it's great. Anyway,
what page?
Oh, sorry, I should have mentioned that.
Okay, 14. I see here. Oh,
Issues
no, that's right.
14. Yeah. But yeah, Who's Who? Update 88, page 14. It's a great shot by Vince Argo. It's hard to see this. Argo Detsy, I think. But anyway, this is a great shot. I love it. And he appeared in All-Star Squadron and Infinity Incorporated. So that's actually technically Sandman 3. Now we're going to talk about Sandman 4, which you're going to tell us about. This is the one that everybody knows, which is Dream Dream of the Endless, which has now been turned into a TV show. And this is what put Vertigo on the map and made an international star of Neil Gaiman. And you're going to tell us what happens in the first issue here.
Right. So this first issue is essentially the first episode of the Netflix series, if you've seen that. So we start off this issue with, first of all, too, let's just say right off the bat with the cover. This is like classic, crazy, like artwork mixed with photography, which happens a lot in these comics. But in the center, we have like this abstract portrait of Dream. Like his face is closer to the center, and then everything else is he's like kind of in shadow, and the shadows just kind of grow the entire image. And then it's almost shaped in an hourglass, like a...
Good point. I never thought of that, yeah.
Like a... not a sand... What's it called? Like a sand timer.
Hourglass.
What's that called?
Hourglass.
Like, yeah.
Well, and we should point out that, again, like, sometimes I forget how early this was. This is January 1989.
89,
so
yeah.
I was just getting into DC Comics. Like, I just started getting into Batman with Death in the Family around this time. And 1989, let's remember, was the year Batman was released, right? So when I think back to the other DC Comics that were released around this time, there was nothing really like this on the stands. Other than, I mean, Swamp Thing was their kind of famous horror series. And Alan Moore had, you know, set the standard with Swamp Thing, but Alan Moore was already off Swamp Thing for a couple years by this point. But this cover looked like nothing else on the stands. It was really a game changer.
Yeah, it's very, very strange, very different. And on the sides, we've got like actual images of different like trinkets and objects. We have got some like orchids in front of like a ripped up page from an old book. We have a cat. We have some shells and butterflies and geodes. We have a timer at the bottom. We have like a little note that's ripped up. I don't even know what it says there. A lily, a jar with some like lace around it or something. A Buddha statue, hourglass, some books. Like it's so strange, very different. Honestly, even like today, you don't see anything like this. Like it's very, it's very unique.
And we should also point out that even with these types of characters, DC gutted Vertigo about 10 years ago, I think.
Oh, right.
And kind of replaced it with Black Label, but I mean, Black Label's okay, but DC doesn't really do Vertigo anymore. Like, they don't really go after this adult market anymore, unfortunately. So if you want to find comics like this, you're really only going to find them at like Image and other publishers, right? So this was, especially for a time that people kind of derided the 1990s, but Vertigo and all the books from Vertigo, which this was a precursor to Vertigo, but they were all great. You know, like Sandman Mystery Theater, Doom Patrol, Shade the Changing Man, Animal Man, all that stuff. They were all great. So anyway, just a little plug there for Vertigo.
Right. Yeah. So starting off with this story, we start off in 1916 in England. We see this car pull up to this giant manor, like this mansion essentially, and he nervously walks up to the door. He knocks on this like very ornate, evil, demonic looking knocker on the front door, and a waiter or butler answers it and brings him in, and he's led to this like study, this library, where this old man is sitting there at a secretary, and he tells him to take a seat, and he brings him in some tea. And it turns out that this old man that drove up to the manor works at a museum, like a museum curator, and he's actually there to sell this owner of this mansion a book called the Magdalene.
I guess it's Magdalene, like Mary Magdalene.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, and he takes it from him, and he's like, this is the last thing that we need to hold our ceremony. And we cut over to like a few days later the same year. We see in Toronto, Canada, somebody is reading, this mother is reading to her daughter,
Alice Through the Looking Glass.
Right.
Yeah.
We cut to Jamaica, and we see like we're just seeing kind of this like montage as we're like checking in with all of these random civilian characters that aren't really named, and as they like fall asleep.
And it's all tied into so the kid is being read Alice in Wonderland, or Alice Through the Looking Glass. The kid in Jamaica is dreaming about a castle made of clouds. The soldier is he's 14 years old, and
he's in like war, yeah,
World War One, right? And then the last one is a girl who dreams of a tall, dark man. His eyes burn like twin stars in her head, and who's obviously the Sandman, right? Dream,
right?
So then we cut back to the main story. Sorry.
Yeah. So we see his name is oh man,
the old man.
Burgess, right? The last name?
Roderick Burgess.
Burgess.
Yeah.
So we see Roderick and his son, and they go down into this basement. They go down these like long winding stairs, and it looks like it's almost stone, like it's carved out of the rock that the manor is built on. And they walk through these doors, and there are a bunch of men in robes, and there's this like seance happening with the what's that called on the ground? Oh my god, I'm
pentagram?
Always blanking on words. Yeah, like a pentagram, like a it's like witchcraft. They like write it on the ground. It's like a circle, right. Summoning circle.
Oh, okay.
And
I didn't know that. Okay.
They start this ritual where they're like holding a feather and cutting into their veins, and they're like calling upon this ancient deity, this kid is watching all of this happen. This young boy is his son, and he's absolutely terrified for his life. Mm-hmm. And the crowd starts chanting, and it's like building up, and then this magic light just bursts from this circle, and after it dissipates, we see this figure, this like man with a cloak on and this alien looking face, this helmet, and he falls to the ground. And we get this like beautiful splash page where like almost like the story is starting right now. Everything else is kind of, I mean, it is. We get like the credits and everything right now.
Right. That was just the prelude, whatever.
Yeah. Sleep of the Just. Mm-hmm. Fantastic. So we see this figure laying on the ground, and he has a couple of objects that are like scattered on the ground around him as he fell. They take his helm, his mask. They take this ruby amulet, and they take a bag of sand, and they take this being and they leave him naked there. We cut back over to the people, the montage of people as they were falling asleep, and we learned that they're all falling into this like very deep slumber. The little girl is so tired, she falls asleep, and her dad takes her to her bed, and she never wakes up. The boy is dreaming about the castle and the castle in the clouds, and he falls, and when he wakes up, he's so scared he doesn't fall asleep. The soldier is having like nightmares, and like he's absolutely terrified. I'm not sure who this girl, Unity Kincaid, finds it harder and harder to stay awake, so she's again also like falling asleep forever. After that, we got back to the main story, and we're seeing these like images happening through this globe, and it's very distorted. It's got like a fish eye lens, yeah. And we see a door, and it's like a narration happening. Trapped, observe, and the door opens, and the old man walks up to it, and he kind of starts like saying, we didn't want you, the wrong person showed up, you're trapped now in this crystal cell, and you're not going to be able to escape this until you give me what I want. and they've done like another like magical circle with these runes around this crystal, and nothing is going to ever break it. Like he's not going to he's not going to ever be able to escape unless that circle is broken. So he's essentially stuck there forever. So he leaves, and then we cut forward a few years to 1920. And what is happening now?
So this is now, it's during the World War I is over, and now
the man at the museum. Right, he's so stressed about what's happening, and he feels a lot of guilt and that it's his fault. So and because he can like no longer fall asleep, he's decided that he's going to commit suicide, and he writes down a confession before killing himself that that the guy with the grimoire, it's very possible that it's his fault that all of these like sleeping sicknesses are happening.
Right.
And the old man and the son are watching all of this happen through this like magical mystical crystal ball, and after the man kills himself, he actually burns his suicide note, so no one ever discovers what happens, and everybody thinks that he just committed suicide.
Right. And then basically go ahead.
So his name is cleared forever, essentially, from this, because the one guy that could like explain what happened is now dead.
Well, yeah. So then we jump, like we're jumping ahead in time, so we get to now 1926, and now it's the son, right? And they're talking about how
he's a little bit older.
Yeah, he's a little bit older, and they're talking about how it's pretty cool. He only reads one book. Or no, is that the sequence, or am I screwing it up?
No, I think so. He's definitely reading this book, and he's like talking about the Sandman. This is where they learn that I believe that they got the wrong person. So we're now kind of jumping through time, and we see that the young boy is getting more and more interested in this character Dream. We cut to the 1930s, and at this point, all of the items are sold and like distributed to other places, so they're kind of like all over the world now. We jump over to 1936, and people are still sleeping forever. We find out that a man got an idea to become a superhero and name himself the Sandman and wear a mask and use sand. So that's kind of where it ties into the first Sandman story.
Wesley Dodds, yep.
Yeah. We cut over to 1947. The young boy is now an adult, and him and his father go down to the cellar where Dream is kept, and they're like, he's like, this old man is begging for immortality, and he doesn't get it. We cut over to 1955. Roderick Burgess is now dead. He's been dead for almost 10 years now, and people are still having these like sleeping sicknesses. We cut now to the son, who's like going and trying to like reason with this entity. This is the first time we're getting a clear view of his face when he's talking to the boy, who is now a man, who like feels sorry and some sort of sympathy for this being, and he kind of like is like, hey, do you want to make a deal? I promise, all we want is, if you give me immortality, I promise you can go and get your revenge and do whatever you need to do. And he looks him dead in the eye and says no. We cut over now to the 70s, and he's starting to get old and use a cane like his father did. He once again visits him, refuses. We see he's getting older and older, and now in the the late 80s. He's an old man, and he's having to be pushed around in a wheelchair, and he like visits him one last time, and in like as he's exiting, the person pushing his wheelchair breaks the circle around his cell, which gives him the opportunity to escape. So he lures one of the men over by like collapsing onto the ground, I believe, right? And they think that he's finally died until they unlock the crystal ball, and he grabs some sand and blows it in their face and has them like fall asleep. He escapes. There's like this montage of him like eating because he's been in there for so long,
right?
And he finds clothes, and then he finally goes and confronts the old man, and he essentially curses him to have nightmares for the rest of his life. So he doesn't kill him, he spares his life, but he kind of is now in this like forever slumber where he is constantly having nightmares about dying, and
then waking up, and then
it's actually just another nightmare. And we're now left with this entity as he has a mission to find his 3 missing objects: his helm, his amulet, and his bag of sand, so he can kind of go back to ruling the dream world. Yeah, and that's this one. It's very dense. It's very good. It's such a like well thought out story. Even these like weird vignettes, these moments where we check in with characters that aren't a part of the story is so interesting, and a fun way to tell time without just having, like, they do have the dates, but it shows the passing of time without having to just read that time has passed.
Right.
It's very interesting. I don't think I've ever read anything like this.
Well, I think
before or since. Like, it's so unique.
Here's the thing. I mean, this is my favorite thing about doing this podcast is we're jumping from 39 to 74 to 89. Look at the difference, right? Like, as much as I love Golden Age and Silver Age and Bronze Age comics, I mean, before Alan Moore, there was nothing like him, and now we're into the British invasion, right? Where DC was strip mining the UK of their writers, and they were hiring, like I said earlier, Neil Gaiman, Peter Milligan, Grant Morrison, and then later Garth Ennis and people like that. But imagine, you're a DC fan and you're reading, Blue Beetle and Invasion and Captain Atom, and then this comes out. Like, what the hell is this? And it's like you said, it's so well thought out and so complex. It's not just like the Sandman by Jack Kirby was great, but it was clearly just written and drawn by the seat of his pants. So he was just dashing it off just to fill in another 22 pages or whatever. This is something entirely different. Like, just like Alan Moore was doing, it's an attempt to be real literature, and I think he achieved it. I think this is great. I mean, obviously, I haven't read the whole Sandman series, but I've read most of the volumes, and it deserves its reputation. Like, this is amazing, right? Like, what can you say about this? I mean, of course we recommend it, I think, right?
Oh, 100%. The imagery alone is outstanding. Like, very unique, abstract, scary at times, suspenseful. Like, the story is so unique and fun. I would recommend anybody read Sandman.
100%.
And it's very interesting that this all started from this like nerdy Wesley Dodds character.
Well, we should point out
serial character. It's great.
Right. So we should point out that I actually just coincidentally read this interview with Neil Gaiman from the 90s, I think it was, and they were asking him, so how did the Sandman series come about? Well, it turns out that his first assignment for DC, I believe, it might have been Black Orchid, but his first or second assignment was the books of magic, which we've already reviewed in our
Right.
Dr. Occult episode, right? And what had happened was he was doing this series, and then DC said, well, the problem with this book is it's great, but if we put it out now, no one's going to buy it because no one knows who you are and no one knows who Dave McKean is. So how about this? We'll put Dave McKean on a Batman book, which ended up being Arkham Asylum. And how about you do something like a mini-series, and we'll just put it out quickly just to get it out so people know your name. So he went home, he came up with Sandman. So the Sandman was only created...
Just over the weekend.
Yeah, so that he could get his name out there so they could promote the books of magic, which is crazy to think about.
That's wild.
Right? Yes.
Because when I think about the books of magic, I feel like it's tied into this more than the opposite. You know what I mean? It's
right.
Yeah.
And the other interesting thing is, this is, I believe, the only volume that really ties into the DC universe. So as we said, we do see a glimpse of the Wesley Dodds Sandman. Later on, we see glimpses of the Justice League and the Martian Manhunter. So at this point...
Oh, interesting.
I think it was firmly entrenched in DC continuity. But then later, they just ignored DC continuity, thankfully, because it would have, I think, bogged down the series.
I do too, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And, of course, now that DC has been rebooted twice since this series, even the continuity is a little bit shaky about, like, the Sandman existing in the 40s, because then they rebooted it with New 52 and blah, blah, blah.
Right.
But it's best just to not worry about that. Like, so even when I lend this to people who are not comics fans, I always give the preamble that there is some references to the DC superheroes, but you can just ignore those for the most part, you know?
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about the art briefly? I do think the art is fairly good by Sam Kieth, but I'm not a huge fan of his. What do you think about the art in this?
I think it's great. I don't think that this type of art is for every story, though. It's very unique. It's very stylized and extremely abstract at times. It's got... I think it's perfect for this story. I think that it's so detailed in specific ways that it lends itself well to this very complex story about these weird, mystical, ancient beings. So I think it's great. I think it fits with the unique story. The even down to like the borders around the entire page at times when like certain things are happening, like the entire seance, the summoning circle of Dream, it's these like very ornate, extremely detailed golden frames that are framing the entire page of this this scene, where the entire page is black as well, and then the panels are on top of it instead of it having a white background.
Yes.
Like, I don't know, there's just so much to the art. I mean, something that I noticed too with this one was like there's weird details even with like what some of the characters' shirts are. Like one of the goons watching Sandman, he's like relaxed against the wall and he's reading a news. Or no, he's.
Which page is this?
There are two guards. I don't have the. I'm sorry, I don't have. I don't know why it doesn't show me what page number it is.
Okay.
It's later in the book though. It says there are two guards in the room at all times. Coffee and amphetamines are freely available. The guards never sleep on duty. And there's like this guy. He's in like shorts with a t-shirt, and it's tucked in, and it's like Daffy Duck on the front of the shirt, and there's a word bubble that says, "Do what you will, Buster." So it's just like, I don't know, it's like, and he's like so relaxed and doesn't really care, and it just shows kind of like the power dynamic just with that, like the shirt that he's wearing, the guard watching Dream. It's so interesting. It also too, like the fact that Dream is in this big crystal ball, and every time it's from his point of view, it's in like the panel itself is a ball.
Right.
As a crystal is very unique and interesting. The detail of like weird side characters that we don't even know the name of, aging along with the characters to show time passing. Like we see the son as he's getting older, and it's like 3 panels next to each other, and he's got like 3 goons behind him, and they're also aging as like 3 decades are passing. It's just so, I think that the art is absolutely perfect for this comic, and I wouldn't change a single thing.
Well, since we're, being so generous with our compliments, I'm going to point out some things I don't like about the art, because I do think some things are great, but I just want to point out that to me, Sam Kieth's art reminds me of like a little bit of Bernie Wrightson, a little bit of Robert Crumb, and I do think that it's definitely appropriate for this story, and it reminds me of old DC horror and mystery comics from like the 60s, which is perfect, right? Which is what they're going for. But certain panels are just, in my opinion, just flat out poorly drawn. Like, for example, the splash page is great, like when Dream first appears in the circle and all that stuff. I love that sequence when they're stealing his stuff away from him, like his ruby, the helmet, and then the satchel. And I love that whole thing where the main guy who's holding the little bag, everyone else is around him, almost like a star formation. It's just something that most artists wouldn't think of, and I think that's him at his best. Like, those little details are cool. Some of the close-ups of the faces are really good. I don't like when he gets into the more exaggerated caricature faces. It's a little bit too much for me. And then as I'm just flipping through here really quickly, like some of the horror elements, like when the guy's head explodes, of course that's great, right? He's perfect. And then later on, there's just a couple of really weak, I don't know, like, I mean, like Dream himself looks okay, but not as well drawn as other artists did in the future, like the later issues of the series, and then there's a really it starts to get a little bit sloppy at the end when Sandman is starting to get his revenge with these guys. When he finally appears and we have that shot of him kind of floating in, I don't know if he's floating, but it's almost like he's being taken away by the wind. It's a fairly cool shot, but it's also so awkward that to me it almost makes it slightly anticlimactic because I don't really like the shot. You know which part I'm talking about? It's like
interesting. Where there's that like big vortex.
Yeah.
Looking thing. Oh, I love that.
Yeah, I don't love it. I think it's okay, but I don't love it. I don't know. It's just like some sequences look a little bit sloppy. And then there you go. If you flip to the next page, we have the close-ups of his face. Then we have the celebrities like Marilyn Monroe and John Wayne. And then at the very bottom, when he's grabbing the food and like he's got like the chicken and like the submarine sandwich. I think that's pretty brutal. That picture. I think it's pretty rough. And then the next panel, we get the shot of him floating. Then we see the close-up of his face. Then when he's all garbed up in his like leather black trench coat, it's okay, but it's just not great. I don't know. It just feels a little bit sloppy. And but then when you flip a couple more pages forward, and we see the shots of the man like in the hallway, and like the mirror and the candle burning. And like the cat and the room twisting around. This is him at his best, I think, because we just reviewed a Jack Kirby comic, and he's my favorite superhero artist. But this is like the opposite of that, right? This is like emphasizing like kind of more distorted perspective and texture and all the things that make horror comics and suspense comics cool, rather than action and violence, right? Which is what makes superhero comics cool. So I think these later pages are really good, but there's just a few pages that kind of lapse for me. But again, overall, this style is definitely appropriate for the story.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I don't know. I feel like I can excuse some of the weirdness at times because the storytelling is so great in it. It's like very much how I feel about Todd McFarlane. I can pick apart his art, but he's one of my favorite Spider-Man artists because of how he tells stories through his paneling and layouts and everything. It's just so interesting to look at that. When Dream looks a little strange in one of the panels, you could definitely point out like many parts in this where you're like, oh, the face is so weird here or whatever. It's out of proportion, but I don't mind. I personally don't mind those moments of weirdness in art because the storytelling to me is so good in it. So
I gotcha.
Yeah, I get where you're coming from, though.
Yeah.
I definitely see the weirdness at times.
And we should point out that Sam Kieth did have his own Image comic, speaking of Todd McFarlane, called The Max. Did you ever read The Max?
No, I don't think I have.
Yeah, it was pretty good. It was drawn by Sam Kieth, created by him, and written by William Messner Loebs of Flash fame. So, yeah, it was pretty good. It was turned into a cartoon on MTV as well. So it was pretty successful, yeah. The Max. It's pretty cool. But anyway, usually around this time we would stop, but this time we've actually got one more Sandman to talk about, and it's Wesley Dodds again. But what happened with DC was they decided to revive the Wesley Dodds Sandman, and instead of bringing him to the present day, they created a new series set in the 1930s, which I thought was brilliant. I love the idea. So this is April 93, and again, now Vertigo is at full power here. We see the cover here, DC Vertigo, and we see again an innovative cover. It's not just the name of the lead character. It's called Sandman Mystery Theater, which throws people off because certain people who are not familiar with DC get very confused because they have at least 4 different versions of Sandman, let alone the Marvel version that's the Spider-Man villain, right? So it's a little bit complex to explain who each one of these are. But this is the Wesley Dodds Sandman, and we have this really cool cover of him in his gas mask, which we'll talk a little bit more about later. But basically, this story opens up with some visions, right, of like a woman, a guy in World War I being kind of succumbing to the deadly effects of gas. For those who don't know, and I'm not an expert in World War I, but one of the things they did was they used to, when they were fighting in the trenches, they used gas in warfare, which has now become illegal, under, I don't know which convention, but it's illegal to use in warfare. But back then, this was all the rage in war, using gas to, kill each other's soldiers. So we open up with a woman getting ready to go out. Her father doesn't want her to go out. She goes out anyway. She leaves the house, and when the guy goes to his safe, he sees a man standing there who we know is the Sandman, who's going into his safe. The Sandman gasses him with his gas gun. He gets knocked out, and the Sandman disappears. Really, we'll talk about the art later, but the art's incredible. We then cut over to this party of all these I don't know what you'd call them, just rich people kind of just hanging out. And again, this is the 1930s, so there's some jazz playing in the background, and Prohibition had just ended a few years earlier, and so this is kind of like a carryover of like a speakeasy or whatever you would call it, where everyone's just hanging out and drinking and having fun and dancing or whatever. So you see these 2 girls dancing, we're getting to know them, they're best friends, and then they get into a cab and they drive home, and one is a brunette and one is a blonde. The blonde gets out, and she's just about to get into her apartment. She pulls her keys out, and then all of a sudden she's attacked by this guy. The cab leaves, so the cab doesn't know what just happened. Like, the woman in the cab doesn't know what just happened. And then the woman wakes up in the morning and goes about her business. And then, now this is a very dense story. It's actually more dense than the Neil Gaiman story.
Yeah.
There's a lot
strangely
to talk
enough.
about. Yeah, I know. There's
because it's very down to earth, like earth based, set in reality, but it's so yeah.
And so it's basically like reading a good novel or watching a really good detective TV show, right? Like there's almost no vestiges of the superhero genre here, other than the fact that this guy is a superhero. But a few pages in, we're introduced to Wesley Dodds, who we should point out was intentionally drawn in this series to be more of a slighter build, and kind of like my comparison is Michael Keaton in Batman. I mean, one of the things about Michael Keaton in Batman was that he was not 6 feet tall. He was not a bodybuilder. He was not traditionally handsome. And that's kind of what this guy is. He just looks like a regular guy that you would never dream as a vigilante, right? I personally think maybe that's what they're going for. I don't know. But so we're introduced to Wesley Dodds. So he is friends with and this is, I hope I'm getting this right, but this is the father of the brunette.
Yes.
I believe, right? Yes. Okay. So Wesley Dodds meets the brunette. They click. They seem to be getting along, right? And then we find out. Oh, so then Wesley Dodds. So then the guy gets called away, and the guy he's with is. Oh, what is he? I can't remember. Is he?
He's like a lawyer, right?
Yeah. Okay. So then he gets called away. So Wesley Dodds goes with them, and they go and they find out that. Oh, geez. I just read this a few nights ago, and I'm already forgetting what happened here. But what is it they find out here? Do you remember? You read it like 2 weeks ago, right?
Oh, yeah. It's been a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
So the party kind of continues or whatever, and then like an officer kind of comes up to the father, who is like a detective, I am assuming, and kind of whispers in his ear. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes, yeah. So
like
this is where they find out
this is,
that the girl was kidnapped. Yep.
Yes. So all they know that is she went missing, and the reason why it's important to him is that it's because it's his daughter's friend, and the last person to see her was the daughter. Right. Which I believe her name is Diane, right?
I think so, yeah. Okay. And then this guy is relating to Wesley Dodds about the information. They're saying that the guy who kidnapped the girl... they don't know the connection yet, but he says, well, I've just overheard they've got some mysterious kidnapper on their hands, calls himself the Tarantula. And Wesley Dodds is kind of just intently listening. But just like in the original Batman stories, he's pretending to be a carefree kind of like, jackass, just like Bruce Wayne was. Well, you can't solve all the world's problems, Tom. At least be glad for those you can. So then it's to put off this guy off the scent of Wesley Dodds, so he doesn't know that he's the Sandman, right? So then we cut over to back to the father and his daughter. He's arguing with his daughter, and he tells her that the blonde has been kidnapped. So the girl's all upset, but that's basically all they know. So then we cut over to the Is this the Sandman with? Yeah, he's like getting together his.
This is such a great page.
It's it's a silent page. He's like mixing this potion together to create like the chemical that he uses for his gas gun. It is so freaking cool. And you know what's funny? I didn't notice this until I posted this online. Someone pointed out. Okay, this is cool. When Wesley Dodds this guy was wrong. I was just about to say you only see his eyes when he has the Sandman's mask on, but it's not true. You see his eyes when he's Wesley Dodds. So ignore everything I just said. Yeah, I was about to say you never see his eyes when he's Wesley Dodds, but of course you do. You just saw them. Anyway, he puts on his mask, and then we cut back over to this is like another party, right? And no. Then they go to the father's house, and now we meet his son. His son is there. He's moved back. I think was he in the war? I don't remember. No, he wasn't in the war. But anyway, he's moved back in the house, and then we can see through the window that the Sandman is watching everything that's going on, and we're seeing all this stuff happening, and it's too complex for me to remember because I'm a primate. And basically, if you can remember any of this, feel free to share.
I'm trying to remember what's happening. I think that they're just trying to put the pieces together at this point.
Right.
I can't remember why this event is even happening right now. Because there's like another party going on.
Yeah, and Wesley Dodds is there. See, that's the thing is, the Sandman was at the previous location, but now we're somewhere else. Right? Because now Wesley Dodds is there. Yeah, so this is like a new scene. But again, this is like only 4 years later, but you mentioned how they're finding more sophisticated ways to show the passage of time. Here, they're not doing, like, there are shitty Marvel comics I read in the late 80s where from one panel to the next, they'll have a little caption that says, later, and it's just like the guy just walked from outside to inside, and they have to put a caption. It's so insulting to the reader's intelligence. But anyway, so yeah, now we're in a new scene, and as Wesley Dodds is listening, he's using his, what is it called, origami? He's like folding up this paper, and then at the end of the scene, he leaves a little tarantula there. It's kind of like a cool little touch, you know?
Yeah.
And then we cut over to, who is this that goes
This
home?
is just some guy, right?
Yeah,
like he's
some
taking out the
random guy.
trash,
Yes.
probably from like a restaurant or something, it looks like.
And he looks up and he sees what we assume to be the blonde from the beginning of the story, tied up naked, all bloodied and beaten, and we assume dead. So then we cut over to the cops, and we see the father who runs into his daughter, and he's like, "Diane, what are you doing here?" Oh no, that's not. Sorry, I'm.
This is like this is the judge. She went to go talk to the judge.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Right. And so then so she gets coffee spilled on her outfit. So then I love this. So then she goes into the bathroom and she's kind of commenting how they get so few women here that the lights are not even on in the women's bathroom. So then she turns on a flashlight, and this is so great. It's one of these old bathrooms with the old style checkered tile, and we see her flashlight on, and we see a shadowy figure in the corner, and when the flashlight gets to him, we see that it's the Sandman, and he's looking at her, and the last page is a giant splash page of him reaching up with his hand, and it's freaking awesome.
It's great, yeah.
Holy moly, I love this. Oh my god, I think that just from doing this podcast, I'm now going to be starting to read Sandman and Sandman Mystery Theater, again. Like, I've got to eat these up. They're so good. I love this issue. I can say that overall, I'll first start by saying, I think that the Sandman by Neil Gaiman is more creative, but maybe because this is 4 years later, but again, it's not just DC anymore, it's Vertigo. They have ditched all of the conventions of a typical superhero comic, and for that reason, at least on a technical level, I like the storytelling better in this one. And of course, I love crime noir detective fiction, so I have nothing but good things to say about this. What did you think?
Yeah, it's very great. I loved it when we read it a few weeks ago,
right.
And I immediately started. I immediately went back and read this issue before you even told me that we were going to be reviewing Sandman next. So that's why it had been a while since I've read this one. Now, I think what's so great about this is that it feels like this story could be told in any medium and it could work. Like, it's just a good, solid story. I think most comics, I know that it is a show now, but the show doesn't necessarily do the comic justice. Like, true. Like you can watch the show and then read this first issue, and you'll have two different experiences. With this, I feel like it's just a story that just so happens to be in a comic book.
Sure, yeah.
If that makes sense. Like this could easily just be an adaptation of a TV show or a movie or something. Like, it's just so real. Like, it like everything in it feels tangible, even down to like how everything is drawn, and the city looks extremely realistic. The people do. Even like the vehicles and his like gas mask like feels like a real gas mask. It's not a comic book fake mask. Right. Everything in it feels like almost like research was done to draw every single thing in this book. I agree. And it shows, like, I think it lends to this like very serious story, and I think to the build up to this reveal of the woman hanging from the scaffolding, or the scaffolding. No, what's it called? The escape
fire
stairs.
Escape.
Yeah,
fire escape. Yeah.
Is such a shock, because everything feels so slow and real that when you finally get to the end, that is almost like a jump scare, and you're just looking down to the next panel, and you're like,
you're kind of hoping that she'll turn up alive, right?
Yeah, it's such a shock. Yeah, it's great. I love the little details of the characters too. Like, they all have these like weird nuances and things about them that they do. Like, Diane is very strong, stubborn. She's doesn't really want to listen to what her father says. She's going to go out and party anyways while she's young. Mm-hmm. She wants to go out even after this. Like, I want to live my life. She goes down to the courts just to like kind of figure things out on her own. Like, she's very strong-headed. Sandman, Wesley, is also like he's probably the character we know least about, and we see the least in this book.
Yes, true. But
there's like small moments of him like just being an interesting character, like the small details of how he studied in Asia and spent most of his life in Japan when he was studying and folding the origami. It's also like so strange that he would even choose to make a tarantula and leave it there. Right. Like, it's just, I don't know, like you could tell that this guy's not all there. Like, that would also like probably raise suspicions that you're the tarantula. It's just, I don't know, that it's there's so many little things and little details that really add to this story and makes it feel so real.
Right. I want to point out that this series, the entire series, was written by, I think we talked about this last time, but it was written by Matt Wagner, then later Matt Wagner and Stephen T. Siegel, and then later just Stephen T. Siegel. But Matt Wagner is known for doing the independent book, Grendel, also another series called Mage, and he's done a bunch of work on, a little bit of work on DC, like he did Batman and the Monster Men, Batman and the Mad Monk, but he's kind of known as like a noirish, writer. And, again, like you said, I'm not reading a comic book version of noir. Like, this is noir, this is great detective fiction, and this would make such a good, like you said, you could just take it, adapt it one for one into a TV series, and it would be perfect, I think. Yeah. I am so excited about reading the rest of this. Like, there's only 70 issues, I think. Yeah. And they're on my radar. I'm going to read them. I don't know what else to say.
This is something that I would like buy. Like, we're reading them digitally. This is something that I want to get and have on my shelf.
Yeah, for sure. I agree.
100%.
And we talked about the art when we did the Crimson Avenger episode, but I actually think the art on this issue is slightly better. And I want to point out, like, even if you go to the second page, like, or the third page, like when the guy's hand is on the door handle, the fact that instead of just drawing it in with a typical shading, he just draws those spaced out lines just to give it that comic booky cartoonist texture, and then look at the guy's face on the bottom panel. Like, again, instead of just shading it in, you're drawing these lines, and it just gives it such a nice texture. And he's also using Golden Age panel designs. Like, in the Golden Age, they had a lot of circular panels like that. They don't really have them much anymore, so it's obviously a callback to that, but he's doing a more sophisticated modern day storytelling with Sandman looking over his shoulder at him and holding the gun, and oh god, I just love it. I love everything about it.
Yeah, it's great. I think it helps too that it's a period piece. Like, it's set in the 30s, and like you can tell. Like, I love even the little details in the story that hint to that. Like, it's after Prohibition. They're talking, like, he offers Sandman a drink, and he's like, no, I don't drink. And they're kind of like laughing at him, like, what? Why not? We can drink now, so why not just drink and party? And maybe that's why they're having so many parties, just because they can at this point.
And there's something about Wesley Dodds in this version that the fact that he's sort of quiet and unassuming, it just makes him even cooler to me. The fact that that beneath it, that disguise, he's the Sandman. I just think it's so cool. He's not like Bruce Wayne. Like, Bruce Wayne is like the handsome playboy, and this guy's just some schlep that no one really would think anything of, right?
Yeah, this like dorky kind of.
Yeah. I just think it makes me even cooler. I would love to see this adapted. Oh, I don't even know what to say about it. But yeah, so hopefully, if anything, not only are we learning on this podcast, but we're also discovering new series that we're going to read, because this is definitely one that I'm going to jump right into. I'll be reading, I'm going to be reading Neil Gaiman's Sandman and this, I think, in the next few months, for sure. Whew! So, as everybody knows, we are going in chronological order for DC superheroes, which brings us to, any guesses who's next? Josh?
Oh, I don't know. I feel like we've got to be coming up on Batman soon.
Correct.
Is it? Am I really? Oh, wow.
Next episode is The Batman. Yes. And we will be joined by a very special guest, someone who I've never met before. I only know from comic book Facebook pages, Paul Carbonaro, who I only know from, I believe, the Marvel Comics group on Facebook. So be sure to join us. I'm sure we'll get more listeners than usual. It's going to be a really good episode. Like I said, Batman, be sure to join us. We'll be comparing his various origins over the years. If you'd like to join us to do some pre-reading, we're going to be reviewing Detective Comics number 33, Batman 47, and Detective Comics 235. So there you go. Be sure to join us. And Josh, you can take it from here.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for listening to our podcasts. You can find all of our stuff over on our website at thecomicbooksyndicate.com. You can find us also on our YouTube channel or our Facebook page at the Comic Book Syndicate. Please leave us a comment or comment on one of our posts on Facebook. Let us know what you guys think about the comics we're talking about and the podcast themselves, or what you want us to read or talk about next. Yeah, keep in touch. Let's keep that comics conversation going.
There you go. So until the next time.